A mother's love is supposed to be unconditional. It is the first bond we form, the foundation of trust that shapes our entire lives. From the moment a child takes their first breath, a mother becomes their protector, their guardian, their safe harbor in a turbulent world. But what happens when that sacred bond becomes something unrecognizable? What happens when the very person entrusted to protect a child becomes their destroyer? Tonight, Crime Unknown takes you into the darkest corners of California's criminal history to examine 10 cases that shook communities to their cores. These are not stories of strangers committing crimes against children. These are stories of mothers, women who were supposed to love, nurture, and protect, who instead inflicted unimaginable horror upon their own flesh and blood. From the Sacramento suburbs where a mother kept her children in a house of terror for years, to a Perris home where 13 children were discovered chained and starving, to the Palmdale neighborhood where an 8-year-old boy named Gabriel endured months of torture that would become the subject of a Netflix documentary watched by millions around the world. These cases span decades, from the 1980s to 2022, but they share common threads: betrayal, tragedy, and the fundamental question of how a mother could commit such acts against her own children. If you are new to Crime Unknown, welcome. We cover true crime stories that often fly under the radar, giving voice to victims whose stories deserve to be told. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Now let us begin. Case 1. Theresa Knorr. On a November day in 1993, a young woman named Terry Norwalker picked up her phone and dialed the America's Most Wanted hotline. She was not calling about a stranger. She was calling about her own mother, a woman who had murdered 2 of Terry's sisters and forced her surviving siblings to help dispose of the bodies. For nearly a decade, Theresa Jimmy Cross Knorr had gotten away with the murders of her daughters Suzanne and Sheila. Their bodies had been found, but they remained unidentified Jane Doe's in cold case files. Terry's phone call would change everything. Theresa was born on March 14, 1946, in Sacramento, California. By all accounts, her early life was marked by tragedy and instability. Her mother died in her arms when Theresa was just 14 years old, an event that would haunt her for the rest of her life. At 16, she married her first husband, Clifford Sanders. 2 years later, on July 6, 1964, Theresa shot and killed him during an argument. She was acquitted, claiming self-defense. This pattern of violence would define Theresa's life. She went on to marry 3 more times, and with each failed relationship, her behavior grew more erratic and dangerous. By the late 1970s, after her 4th divorce, Theresa had descended into alcoholism, paranoia, and delusion. She had 6 children from her various marriages: Howard, Sheila, Suzanne, William, Robert, and Terry. After her final divorce, Theresa became increasingly isolated, gaining significant weight and rarely leaving her Sacramento apartment. She disconnected the telephone, forbade visitors, and pulled her children out of school. Inside that apartment, a nightmare was unfolding. Theresa developed bizarre delusions about her daughters Suzanne and Sheila. She became convinced they were witches who were casting spells on her, spells she believed were causing her weight gain. She was intensely jealous of her daughter's youth and beauty, according to Terry's later testimony. Suzanne received the worst of the abuse. Theresa kept her handcuffed under the dining room table for approximately 2 years. She force-fed Suzanne until she vomited, then made her eat the vomit. When Suzanne tried to run away, she was placed in a psychiatric hospital where she reported the abuse, but she was returned to her mother's custody. In 1982 or 1983, Theresa shot Suzanne in the chest with a .22 caliber pistol. The bullet lodged in Suzanne's back, but Theresa refused to take her to a hospital. For over a year, Suzanne lived with that bullet inside her body. In July of 1984, when Suzanne expressed a desire to leave home, Theresa agreed to let her go, on one condition. The bullet had to be removed first. What happened next defies comprehension. Theresa orchestrated an amateur surgery on the kitchen floor. Using Mellaril and alcohol as anesthesia, she ordered her son Robert to cut the bullet out of Suzanne's back using an X-Acto knife. The surgery was a disaster. Suzanne developed a severe infection that turned to sepsis. Her skin turned yellow with jaundice. She became delirious. On July 16, 1984, Theresa bound Suzanne with duct tape and drove her to a remote area near Highway 89, close to Squaw Valley. There, while Susan was still breathing, Theresa ordered her sons to set their sister on fire. Susan Marlene Knorr was 17 years old. Her charred body was discovered the next morning by a passing motorist. She was classified as Jane Doe number 487384. The autopsy would later reveal that the cause of death was smoke inhalation, meaning Susan was alive when the flames consumed her. Less than a year later, Sheila would meet a similar fate. In May of 1985, Theresa forced Sheila into prostitution to support the family. For a brief time, Sheila was treated better because she was bringing in money. But then Theresa accused Sheila of being pregnant and claimed her daughter had given her a sexually transmitted disease. Theresa beat Sheila, hogtied her, and locked her in a tiny closet approximately 2 feet square with no ventilation. For 3 days, Sheila was denied food and water. Terry, the youngest daughter, defied her mother once, giving Sheila a beer through the closet door. On June 21, 1985, Sheila Gay Sanders died of dehydration and starvation at 20 years old. Her body was left in the closet for an additional 3 days before Theresa had her sons place it in a cardboard box and dump it near the Truckee Tahoe Airport. For 8 years, Theresa Knorr lived freely while her daughters lay in unmarked graves. But Terry could not forget what she had witnessed. Terry escaped the household at 16 and eventually settled in Utah. She tried multiple times to report the murders to police, but investigators dismissed her claims as fiction. It was not until October 28, 1993, when she called America's Most Wanted, that anyone took her seriously. Placer County detectives listened to Terry's story and realized her account matched details from 2 unsolved Jane Doe cases. Within weeks, William Knorr was arrested in Woodland, California. Then, on November 10, 1993, Theresa Knorr was arrested in Salt Lake City, Utah, where she had been working as a caregiver for an elderly woman under her maiden name. When arrested, she had $4,000 withdrawn from her bank and bags packed. She was preparing to flee. The trial revealed the full extent of the horror that had occurred inside the Knorr household. Both William and Robert testified against their mother as part of plea agreements. On October 17, 1995, Theresa Knorr pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. At sentencing, Judge William R. Ridgway characterized her crimes as callousness beyond belief. Today, Theresa Knorr remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. She is now 79 years old and eligible for parole consideration beginning in 2027. In July of 2024, she waived her parole hearing. Terry Knorr, the daughter who finally brought her mother to justice, died on December 8, 2011, of heart failure at just 41 years old. As one neighbor who knew the family would later say, "I knew they were weird, but I didn't know they were that weird." If you are finding this documentary informative, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light. Now, let us continue to our next case. Case 2, Louise Turpin. On January 14, 2018, at approximately 6 in the morning, a 17-year-old girl climbed through a window of her family's home on Muir Woods Road in Perris, California. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911 on a deactivated cell phone she had secretly obtained. Her name was Jordan Turpin, and she was about to expose one of the most shocking cases of child abuse in California history. "I live in a family of 15 people and my parents are abusive," Jordan told the dispatcher. "My 2 little sisters right now are chained up to their beds." The call lasted 22 minutes. Jordan revealed that she had not finished 1st grade, did not know what medication was, and had to read her own address from a piece of paper because she did not know it. She described how her parents hit them, threw them across the room, and pulled their hair. She spoke of chains, starvation, and isolation. She had been planning this escape for over 2 years. When Riverside County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Turpin home, they expected to find young children. Instead, they discovered that 7 of the 13 siblings were adults. They just looked like children because severe malnourishment had stunted their growth. The eldest daughter, Jennifer, was 29 years old but weighed only 82 pounds. Inside, deputies found a house reeking of human excrement, decaying garbage, and dead pets. 3 children were still chained to beds. The parents, David and Louise Turpin, had rushed to unchain an 11-year-old and 13-year-old when they heard deputies at the door, but a 22-year-old was still shackled when investigators entered. The children, all with names beginning with the letter J, ranged in age from 2 to 29. They were dirty, caked with grime, and showed signs of years of systematic abuse. They had been allowed to shower only once per year. They were fed one ration meal per day. They slept during the day and stayed awake at night. They had virtually no education. But how does something like this happen? How do 13 children suffer for decades without anyone noticing? Louise and Robinette was born on May 24, 1968, in West Virginia. According to her own sister's later testimony, Louise herself was a victim of childhood abuse, allegedly sold by her mother to a wealthy man who molested her repeatedly. At 16, Louise eloped with David Allen Turpin, who was 23 years old at the time. David had essentially kidnapped her from school, driving 1,000 kilometers to Texas before police returned them. Louise's parents gave their blessing for the marriage shortly after. Between 1988 and 2015, the couple had 13 children. They moved from Texas to California, first to Murrieta in 2010, then to Perris in 2014. To the outside world, the Turpins presented a facade of normalcy. They renewed their vows at a Las Vegas chapel with an Elvis impersonator. They took the children to Disneyland, though prosecutors would later reveal the children were forbidden from going on rides. Louise was listed as the principal of Sandcastle Day School, a private homeschool registered with the California Department of Education. But behind closed doors, the Turpins ran a house of torture. The abuse escalated over time. In Texas, they started with ropes. When one child escaped the rope bindings, they switched to chains and padlocks. The children were kept in rooms 20 hours per day. They used bags and jars for bathroom needs when denied access to toilets. Their parents would bake pies and buy toys, then forbid the children from eating or opening them. When investigators later examined the children, they found devastating medical consequences. Some had heart damage from malnutrition. 2 daughters were found to be unable to bear children due to the effects of the abuse. None had seen a doctor in over 4 years. None had ever visited a dentist. District Attorney Mike Hestron called it among the worst, most aggravated child abuse cases I have ever seen. On February 22, 2019, both David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 felony counts each. They admitted to 1 count of torture, 4 counts of false imprisonment, 6 counts of cruelty to an adult dependent, and 3 counts of willful child cruelty. At sentencing on April 19, 2019, the children had the opportunity to address their parents. One daughter, identified as Jane Doe number 4, said, "My parents took my whole life from me, but now I'm taking my life back. I'm a fighter. I'm strong, and I'm shooting through life like a rocket." A son, identified as John Doe number 2, showed remarkable grace. "I love my parents and have forgiven them for a lot of the things they did to us." Louise Turpin, weeping, addressed her children. "I'm sorry for everything I've done to hurt my children. I love my children so much." Both parents were sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. They will be eligible for parole in approximately 2044. But the story did not end there. In a tragic twist, 6 of the youngest Turpin children were placed with a foster family that would later be charged with abusing them. Marcelino and Rosa, along with their daughter Lenny's, were accused of sexually touching the children, hitting them with sandals and belts, making them eat vomit, and forcing them to recount the trauma from their parents' abuse. In October of 2024, the Olwins pleaded guilty. The foster father was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Additionally, an independent investigation found that hundreds of thousands of dollars donated to help the Turpin children had not been properly distributed. Some children were living in squalor while unable to access the funds meant to support them. Despite everything, the Turpin children are resilient. Jordan, now in her early 20s, has become a public figure. Jennifer, the eldest, married in October of 2024 and published a book titled, "Where Was God?" detailing her experiences. The case prompted calls for homeschool reform in California, though proposed legislation ultimately failed due to opposition from homeschool advocacy groups. Louise Turpin remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. As we continue, Let us remember that the abuse these children endured lasted over 2 decades. Sometimes the most horrific crimes occur not in dark alleys, but in ordinary-looking homes, in ordinary-looking neighborhoods. Case 3. Susan Eubanks. It was a Sunday evening in October of 1997. A Chargers football game was on television. In San Marcos, a quiet community north of San Diego, Susan Eubanks spent the afternoon at a bar with her boyfriend, drinking and arguing about the state of their relationship. By nightfall, all 4 of her sons would be dead. Brandon was 14 years old, a freshman center on the San Marcos high school football team who maintained AB average. Austin was 7, described as having a smile on his face, enthusiastic and energetic, a great all-around kid. Brigham was 6, playing flag football because he was too young for tackle. And Matthew was 4 years old, the baby of the family. Susan Eubanks killed them all. The story of Susan Eubanks is a story of cascading failures, personal, relational, and systemic. Born on June 26, 1964, Susan's childhood was marked by trauma. Her mother died in a house fire when Susan was 8 years old. She was raised by alcoholic parents and rotated among relatives who allegedly abused and neglected her. Later court filings would cite evidence of brain damage from fetal alcohol syndrome. As an adult, Susan worked as a medical technician and nursing assistant. She became addicted to prescription painkillers after work-related back injuries. She struggled with alcoholism and had accumulated $40,000 in credit card debt. She had been through multiple relationships and was receiving only $740 per month in workers' compensation. On the day of the murders, Susan and her boyfriend Renee Dodson argued at a bar in Escondido. Dodson drove her home to her house on South Twin Oaks Valley Road, near California State San Marcos. The arguments continued. Susan slapped Dodson, grabbed his car keys, and ripped out the telephone lines. At some point, Dodson managed to escape. He ran to a gas station and called sheriff's deputies to escort him back to retrieve his belongings. When deputies arrived around 5 in the evening, they found Susan had slashed 2 of Dodson's tires and turned on his headlights to drain the battery. Susan was confrontational with the deputies. She claimed Dodson owed her money and had assaulted her. Eventually, the deputies left, and Susan's estranged husband Eric arrived to drive Dodson to the bar. At the bar, Dodson said something to Eric that should have set off alarm bells. Susan had talked about killing herself and the boys. Eric and Dodson spent several hours drinking. Then Eric received a page alerting him to a voicemail. Susan's voice delivered just 2 words, "Say goodbye." Eric called the sheriff's office requesting a welfare check at approximately 6:30 in the evening. By the time deputies arrived at around 7:30, it was too late. Brandon was found in the living room, shot twice in the head while watching television. A half-eaten bowl of cereal had spilled around him. In the bedroom, the 3 younger boys had been playing Nintendo on bunk beds. Austin was shot once near his left eye on the top bunk. Brigham was shot twice. Matthew, the 4-year-old on the bottom bunk, was shot in the top of his head. There were stippling marks on his face, evidence the gun had been fired at close range. Susan had used a .38 caliber revolver with a 5-shot capacity. She had to reload at least once during the killings. Susan's 5-year-old nephew, her brother's son who had been staying with them, was found unharmed in bed with blankets pulled up to his chin. Susan had shot herself in the stomach, but she survived. 5 suicide notes were found at the scene, addressed to Eric, Dodson, Brandon's father, her sister, and her niece. To Eric, she wrote, "You betrayed me. You kept a diary, and you and Renee Dodson conspired against me. I've lost everyone I've ever loved. Now it's time for you to do the same." 3 of the boys were pronounced dead at the scene. Matthew was rushed to Children's Hospital in San Diego, where his father arrived before his death. He died the following afternoon at 4:30. His organs were donated for transplant. Susan Eubanks was arraigned at her hospital bedside on October 29, 1997, unable to speak due to tubes in her arms and throat. She pleaded not guilty. The trial in 1999 focused on whether Susan had the mental capacity to commit first-degree murder. The defense argued she had blacked out due to the combined effects of alcohol and Valium. Prosecution experts disputed this, pointing to evidence of premeditation. 10 days before the murders, Susan had told a store clerk she bought bullets, and one had his name on it. On August 18, 1999, After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Susan guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. On September 9, 1999, the jury recommended death. Judge Joan Weber called the murders the single most horrific criminal episode in the history of this county. For decades, Susan Eubanks sat on California's death row. But in January of 2020, her attorneys filed a habeas petition arguing ineffective assistance of trial counsel. Judge Weber, the same judge who had sentenced her to death, agreed to review the petition. Evidence of brain damage from fetal alcohol syndrome had not been presented at trial. Mental health experts who could have testified about altruistic filicide, the belief that a parent is protecting their children by killing them, were never called. On October 4, 2024, Susan Eubanks was re-sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The San Diego County District Attorney's Office agreed to the reduced sentence to spare the victim's family the anguish of a new trial. Susan Eubanks, now 60 years old, will spend the rest of her life at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Brandon Armstrong is buried in Texas with a headstone provided by his father. Austin, Brigham, and Matthew Eubanks are buried at San Marcos Cemetery. Their graves marked for years only by small concrete blocks with fading letters. As family friend Melanie Cornwell would later reflect, if somebody had pushed hard enough to find out what the issues were, if maybe someone had pushed hard enough, there would be 4 beautiful boys grown up, graduating, and getting married. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. We are just getting started with this documentary. There are 7 more cases to cover, each one revealing new dimensions of this disturbing phenomenon. Case 4. Dora Louise Buenrostro. At 6:30 in the morning on October 27, 1994, Dora Louise Buenrostro rushed into the San Jacinto Police Department in Riverside County, frantic with fear. "My ex-husband is at my apartment with a knife," she told officers. "He's going to harm our children." Police immediately dispatched deputies to 324 East Shaver Street. What they found would haunt the investigators for years. Susana Buenrostro, 9 years old, and Vicente Buenrostro, 8 years old, lay dead on separate sofas in the living room, covered with a blood-soaked blanket. Both had been stabbed in the throat. Both had defensive wounds on their arms and hands, evidence they had tried to fight off their attacker. That evening, children playing in an abandoned post office sorting facility 10 miles away in Lakeview made a horrifying discovery. The body of 4-year-old Deidre Buenrostro, still strapped in a child's car seat, with a broken knife blade embedded in her neck. Dora had murdered all 3 of her children, and she had tried to frame her ex-husband for the crimes. The investigation quickly unraveled Dora's elaborate deception. Her ex-husband, Alejandro Alex Buenrostro, was picked up in Silver Lake, Los Angeles, 85 miles from the crime scene. His alibi was airtight. He had been at work when the murders occurred. Witnesses and his employer confirmed his whereabouts. When detectives turned their attention to Dora, the evidence mounted rapidly. Blood matching the children was found in her car, on her purse, and on her wallet. Hair found on Deidre's body was consistent with Dora's. Tire impressions near where Deidre was found matched the tires on her black Oldsmobile, a car that had recently been washed, with water still dripping from the back bumper when investigators examined it. The timeline of the murders was particularly chilling. On October 25, 1994, 2 days before the older children were found, Dora had borrowed $10 from a neighbor for gas, saying she was driving to Los Angeles to see her husband. Evidence suggests she killed Deidre during or after that trip. On October 26, Dora went to the San Jacinto Police Department to report that her ex-husband had taken Deidre 2 days earlier. Police told her they could not intervene without a custody court order violation. Early in the morning of October 27, around 3 in the morning, a neighbor heard a really loud thump from Dora's apartment. That was when Susana and Vicente were killed. Hours later, Dora walked into the police station with her story about her ex-husband. When questioned, Dora's story changed each time she told it. She was evasive and non-responsive about Deidre's whereabouts. Investigators noted her bizarre demeanor. She went from laughing and joking to being tired to being nonchalant, but never showed remorse or sadness. On October 29, 1994, Dora Louise Buenrostro was arrested for the murders of her 3 children. At trial, Prosecutors painted a picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and rage. Dora and Alex had separated in 1990 when she moved with the children from Los Angeles to San Jacinto. They were embroiled in a bitter custody dispute. Family members testified that Dora had transformed from a loving mother to an angry, distant woman in the months before the killings. Her mother, Arcelia Zamudio, testified. Something happened to her. She thought Dora might be using drugs because her daughter sometimes described seeing family members transform into animals. Prosecutors argued that Dora killed the children to hurt Alex, that she was angry he was dating other women while she was burdened by childcare responsibilities. On July 23, 1998, after approximately 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Dora guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. During the penalty phase, Dora testified against her attorney's advice. She continued to deny guilt, claimed she was being framed, and lashed out at police, prosecutors, and her own defense attorneys. The jury recommended death. When asked why they chose the ultimate penalty, juror Tia Derico explained, "If she would have said, 'I did it. I'm sorry, I loved my children,' it would have made it easier to vote for life in prison." On October 2, 1998, Judge Patrick Majors formally sentenced Dora Louise Buenrostro to death, making her the only Riverside County woman on California's death row. But her case would have another chapter. In December of 2018, the California Supreme Court issued a unanimous ruling that while her convictions for 3 counts of first-degree murder stood, 2 of the 3 multiple murder special circumstance findings should be vacated. The court reversed her death sentence and remanded the case for a new penalty determination. As of 2025, Dora Louise Buenrostro remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, awaiting resentencing. She is approximately 65 years old and has been imprisoned for over 30 years. Susana, Vicente, and Deidre Buenrostro are buried together in a shared grave. Case 5. Socorro Caro. The Caro family appeared to have everything. Dr. Xavier Caro was a successful rheumatologist with a practice in Northridge. His wife Socorro, nicknamed Cora, had been his office manager. They lived in a 5-bedroom mansion on Priscilla Road in Santa Rosa Valley, with views of the Pacific Ocean. They had 4 sons, Joey, 11, Michael, 8, Christopher, 5, and Gabriel, 13 months. On the night of November 22, 1999, 3 of those boys would be dead by their mother's hand. The evening began like many others. Xavier and Socorro had dinner together and drank margaritas. But an argument erupted over disciplining their eldest son Joey. Xavier wanted to punish him. Socorro disagreed. The conflict escalated. Xavier removed the television and video game system from Joey's room. Socorro accused Xavier of not loving or respecting her. She told him that if he left, she and the boys would starve. What Socorro did not know was that Xavier had been having an affair with an office employee. He had consulted a divorce lawyer in August. He had fired Socorro from her position as office manager after discovering she had allowed the office rent to go unpaid. Around 9 in the evening, Socorro's mother left the home after witnessing the argument. Xavier drove to his medical office in Northridge. Security cameras recorded his vehicle arriving at 9:24 that evening. Socorro called Xavier multiple times at the office. She was crying, agitated, begging him to come home. At some point between 10 in the evening and 11:20, Socorro Caro retrieved a .38 caliber revolver from the family's gun safe, prying it open with a hammer, and went to her son's bedrooms. Joey was shot at point-blank range in the head while lying face down in his bed. Michael, sleeping face up on the bottom bunk, was shot in the head. 5-year-old Christopher was shot twice. The first bullet did not kill him immediately. He sat up before Socorro shot him again. Then Socorro turned the gun on herself, shooting herself in the head. At 11:21, Xavier called 911. He had returned home to find his wife on the floor of the master bedroom. While on the phone with the dispatcher, he discovered his 3 sons were dead. Only baby Gabriel, still in his crib, had been spared. Socorro survived. In her hospital bed the next day, Detective Cheryl Wade interviewed Socorro for 2.5 to 3 hours, even as Socorro recovered from brain surgery. This interview would later be challenged on appeal. Socorro claimed to have no memory of killing her children. She said her last memory was standing in the master bedroom closet looking at a picture of margaritas. The forensic evidence told a different story. Blood matching Christopher's DNA, including what appeared to be brain matter, was found on Socorro's shorts. Blood containing DNA from Joey and Christopher was found under her fingernails. Bloody handprints matching Socorro's were found on the door jamb between Joey's bedroom and the bathroom. At trial, the defense argued that Xavier had committed the murders and framed his wife. They pointed to his affair and his motive to be free of his marriage. A defense expert testified that the angle of Socorro's gunshot wound was highly unlikely to be self-inflicted. But the prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Cheryl Temple, presented compelling evidence of Socorro's guilt. Phone records and security cameras proved Xavier had just left his office at the time of the killings. He could not have been involved. The trial also revealed a troubling history. Socorro had allegedly attacked Xavier or others on 8 separate occasions before the murders. Incidents included punching him in the face, throwing objects that caused a retinal tear requiring laser surgery, and once approaching him with a butter knife after throwing dishes. Xavier admitted he had also been violent with Socorro on at least one occasion. On November 5, 2001, the jury found Socorro Caro guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. On December 10, 2001, they recommended death. At sentencing, Judge Donald Coleman called the killings mass murder of innocent children committed in the sanctity of their homes. He described the children as sacrificial symbolic pawns of a failed marital relationship. Socorro Caro became the first Ventura County woman sent to California's death row since Elizabeth Ma Duncan in 1959, a gap of 43 years. In June of 2019, the California Supreme Court unanimously affirmed her death sentence. Justice Mariano Florentino Cuellar wrote an 89-page opinion addressing Socorro's numerous appeals, including concerns about the hospital interview. Socorro filed a petition with the United States Supreme Court in February of 2020. A habeas corpus proceeding remains pending. Today, Socorro Caro is approximately 67 years old and remains at the Central California Women's Facility. Under Governor Gavin Newsom's moratorium on executions, she will not face the death chamber while he remains in office. Dr. Xavier Caro won a $45 million wrongful death judgment against his ex-wife. He raised their surviving son Gabriel, and, as of 2006, was planning to remarry. Baby Gabriel, the only survivor of that terrible night, was 3 years old at his mother's sentencing. We are halfway through our documentary. Let us take a moment to reflect on what we have heard so far. 5 California mothers. 14 children dead. Patterns are emerging: custody disputes, mental instability, feelings of betrayal, and an inability to cope with the pressures of life. But our next 5 cases will reveal even darker depths. Stay with us. Case 6. Sandy Dawn Nieves. On the night of June 30th, 1998, Sandy Dawn Nieves gathered her 5 children in the kitchen of their home in the Saugus area of Santa Clarita. She told them they were having a slumber party, something she had never done before. The children, 14-year-old David, 12-year-old Nicolette, 11-year-old Rochelle, 7-year-old Crystal, and 5-year-old Jacqueline, spread out their sleeping bags on the kitchen floor and settled in for the night. By morning, 4 of those children would be dead. Sandy had been spiraling for months. She was locked in bitter custody disputes with 2 ex-husbands. Her boyfriend had recently broken up with her after learning she was pregnant. She had an abortion just 1 week before the murders. The day after the killings, she was scheduled to appear in Riverside County Court to negotiate custody of her 2 youngest daughters. That night, after the children fell asleep on the kitchen floor, Sandy turned on the gas from the oven. She poured gasoline in the hallway and bedrooms. She taped the doors and windows to keep the smoke inside. When the children woke, gagging from the smoke, Sandy ordered them to stay where they were. She told them to put their faces into the blankets to avoid breathing in the fumes. When one daughter asked to go to the bathroom to vomit, Sandy ordered her to throw up on the floor instead. Eventually, the fire self-extinguished, causing minimal external damage but filling the interior with deadly smoke. The next afternoon, at approximately 1 in the afternoon, Sandy called 911 in an unusually calm, matter-of-fact tone. "The house is all smoke. We had a fire last night. I woke up and everything was black." When firefighters arrived, They found Sandy and her son David sitting on the living room couch, covered in soot. The four daughters lay dead on the kitchen floor in their pajamas. All four girls, Nicolette, Rochelle, Crystal, and Jacqueline, had died from smoke inhalation. Investigators found angry letters Sandy had written and mailed the day of the fire. To her second ex-husband, David Folden, who had been fighting for custody of their two youngest daughters, she wrote, "Now you don't have to support any of us." To the boyfriend who had left her, she wrote, "I can't live without you in my life." Sandy Dawn Nieves was arrested on July 2, 1998. The trial in 2000 revealed the depths of Sandy's manipulation and control. Her surviving son, David, testified against her, describing how his mother had never done a slumber party before, how she ordered them to stay inside, how she forbade the girls from leaving to use the bathroom. When asked why he did not call 911 or leave the house, David said simply, "I did what my mother did what she told me to do." The prosecution characterized the murders as final revenge against the men in Sandy's life. Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman told the jury, "She won when she inflicted the ultimate punishment on Dave Folden, on Fernando Nieves, and she wins again if you give her life." The defense argued Sandy was not legally conscious at the time, that she was in a sleepwalking-like state, induced by hormonal imbalance, stress, and adverse reactions to prescription drugs. On July 27, 2000, after just one day of deliberation, the jury found Sandy guilty on all counts. For counts of first-degree murder, one count of attempted murder of her son David, and one count of arson. On August 9, 2000, after another single day of deliberation, the jury recommended death. Judge L. Jeffrey Wyatt called the murders cold, vicious, and calculated. He said, "She was staging this multiple murder as her final act of revenge to the men in her life." Sandy Nieves became the 12th woman on California's death row, but her case would take a dramatic turn 2 decades later. On May 3, 2021, the California Supreme Court unanimously upheld her convictions, but reversed her death sentence due to what they called trial court misconduct. The court found that Judge Wyatt had made inappropriate comments throughout the trial that showed conspicuous disdain for defense counsel and witnesses. He had barred evidence that could have shown brain damage. He had refused to let a jail chaplain testify that Sandy was remorseful. In an ironic footnote, Judge Wyatt died by suicide in 2005 while under investigation for alleged child molestation. Today, Sandy Dawn Nieves is approximately 61 years old and incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Following the reversal of her death sentence, and given Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon's policy against seeking the death penalty, she is expected to serve life in prison. In a 2023 documentary, Sandy said her only reason for existing is the thought of one day being able to talk to her son David again. By age 16, David refused all contact with his mother. He throws the letters she sends from jail into the trash without reading them. Case 7. Carol and Coronado. On the morning of May 20, 2014, Carol and Coronado began calling her mother Julie Piercy repeatedly, leaving desperate voicemail messages. "Mommy, please call me. Please, please, please. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm hungry." By the 6th message, her voice was spent. "Mom, please call me. I love you." But Julie, a school bus driver, did not respond. She was working. By the time Julie arrived at Carol's home that afternoon, responding to those earlier calls, it was too late. Carol met her mother at the door, naked, as if she had just come out of the bathroom. Julie hugged her daughter and asked, "How was your day?" Carol shrugged. "It was a bad day, Mom." Julie looked toward the bedroom. Her 3 granddaughters, 2-year-old Sophia, 16-month-old Yasmin, and 2-month-old Xenia, lay on the bed, appearing to be asleep. They were arranged in order of age. Then Carol pulled out a knife. Julie grabbed her daughter's wrist and wrestled the weapon away, screaming, "Hell no." She ran outside with the bloody knife, screaming to Carol's husband Rudy, "Don't go in there." She killed them. Rudy ran inside and forced open the locked bedroom door. His daughters lay on the bed, like they were asleep. Carol was behind them, holding another knife, staring blankly. She told him she loved him, then stabbed herself in the chest. All 3 girls had been stabbed multiple times, throats slashed, stabbed in the heart. Yasmin had also been beaten in the head with a claw hammer. A cross was drawn in blood on Sophia's chest. For knives and a hammer had been used in the killings. The Carol Coronado case became a lightning rod in the national conversation about postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe mental illness affecting approximately 1 to 2 mothers per 1,000 births. Carol had a history of hearing voices since childhood, voices that allegedly began after she was molested at gunpoint by a relative at age 5. She had also endured gang rape as an adolescent and another assault while serving with the California Conservation Corps. After the birth of her third daughter Xenia in February of 2014, Carol rarely slept. She lost dramatic amounts of weight. The voices returned, and they were getting worse. But her doctors saw nothing wrong. Her OBGYN found no signs of postpartum depression at her 6-week checkup. Her primary care doctor saw her just 6 days before the killings and found her to be her usual jovial self. At trial, defense attorney Stephen Allen argued Carol was suffering from postpartum psychosis, that she believed she was sending the children to be safe in heaven. But California's strict insanity standard, the Manhattan test, dating back to 1843, requires proving that a defendant did not know what they were doing was wrong. Carol claimed she had no memory of the killings. Without being able to explain her actions, she could not prove she did not know they were wrong. On November 30th, 2015, Judge Ricardo Ocampo found Carol guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He later ruled she was legally sane at the time. On February 1st, 2016, Carol was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Defense attorney Allen was devastated. He got it wrong. I failed, Carol. In a remarkable twist, Carol's husband Rudy became an advocate for maternal mental health awareness. He testified before the California legislature, helping pass laws in 2018 requiring mandatory screening of new mothers for postpartum mental illness. Your baby mama is not trippin', Rudy now tells fathers at rallies and forums. Your baby mama's going through it. A 2020 KQED investigation found that more than 100 women are in California prisons for killing their children, with 40% taking their baby's life before the child was 1 year old. Unlike over 24 other countries, including England, Canada, and Australia, the United States has no specialized infanticide laws that recognize the role of postpartum mental illness. Carol Coronado remains at the Central California Women's Facility. According to KQED's interview, she still sometimes speaks of her daughters in the present tense. She believed for some time after the killings that her children were still alive, that they were with godparents or relatives. It was her lawyer who finally told her the specifics of what happened. Case 8. Patricia Ortiz. La Grande is an unincorporated community of approximately 1,600 people in California's Central Valley, about 12 miles east of Merced. It is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where neighbors attend the same football games, the same baseball games, the same schools. On January 12, 2022, Patricia Ortiz shattered that close-knit community. That morning, Patricia, a 31-year-old mother of 3, systematically picked up each of her children from their schools and programs. First, she retrieved 3-year-old Alexa from the local Head Start program. After killing Alexa, she dropped off lunch for her husband at his workplace. Then she picked up 5-year-old Mateo and 8-year-old Anna from La Grande Elementary School. At approximately 2:10 in the afternoon, Merced County Sheriff's deputies received calls for a welfare check at an apartment complex on Bryce Street. A man was screaming for help. It was Israel Ortiz, the children's father and the boys' soccer coach at La Grande High School, who had discovered what his wife had done. All 3 children were dead. Deputies described it as one of the most gruesome scenes in their careers. Forensic pathologist Mark Super later testified about the method: suffocation using tape over the children's noses and mouths. Detective Daniel Ramirez testified that Patricia had admitted during interviews how she killed each child, approaching from behind, pulling them to her chest while covering their airways, wrapping her legs around theirs to prevent them from struggling. Each child would have taken approximately 5 minutes to die. Evidence suggested 8-year-old Anna may have been bound at the wrists. Particles of tape were found around marks on her wrists. Patricia was found alive in the bathtub with cuts to her lower arms, a suicide attempt that failed. The investigation revealed a woman in crisis. Patricia had filed for divorce from Israel in August of 2021. Friends said she was in a dark place and had been dealing with mental health issues, depression and anxiety, for months. Neighbors had insisted many times that she get help after separating from her husband. Her husband revealed to investigators that Patricia had exhibited prior suicidal behavior and concerning conversations in the weeks leading up to the killings. The case is still making its way through the court system. In March of 2025, a preliminary hearing was held where the forensic evidence was presented. Patricia's brother Jose Lara expressed the family's continued support in the courtroom. We want her to feel and see our presence and the love we have for her. We will always be here to support her because she deserves it. She's a good person. As of this documentary, Patricia Ortiz faces 3 counts of murder with special allegations of lying in wait. If convicted, she faces life without parole. Defense attorneys have indicated an insanity defense is likely. The impact on LeGrand was profound. Grief counselors were deployed to LeGrand Elementary School. The high school soccer team held a car wash fundraiser for the family. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $54,000 for funeral expenses. Deputy Daryl Allen of the Merced County Sheriff's Office spoke to the community's grief. This is going to affect this town. Everybody in this town knows everybody. When something like this happens, it affects everybody. Anna, Mateo, and Alexa Ortiz Lara were buried at Plainsburg Cemetery on January 26, 2022. 3 hearses carried them from funeral services in Merced. Case 9, Gabriel Fernandez. Of all the cases in this documentary, none has received more attention than the story of Gabriel Fernandez, an 8-year-old boy whose torture and death at the hands of his mother and her boyfriend became the subject of a Netflix documentary watched by millions around the world. Gabriel Daniel Fernandez was born on February 20, 2005, to Gabriel Fernandez and Arnold Contreras. Shortly after birth, Gabriel was placed in the care of his great-uncle Michael Lemos Carranza and his partner, David Martinez. By all accounts, Gabriel thrived in their care. Footage from those years shows a happy, healthy child. But in September or October of 2012, Gabriel Fernandez and her boyfriend Isuro Aguirre took custody of Gabriel. Family members expressed concerns about Gabriel's history of child neglect, but custody was granted anyway. What followed was 8 months of systematic torture that would end with Gabriel's death. Teachers at Summerwind Elementary School began noticing injuries almost immediately. Bruises, missing patches of hair, scabs on his scalp, cuts to his lips, marks on his face from being shot with a BB gun. His first-grade teacher, Jennifer Garcia, made the initial report to child welfare after Gabriel asked her, "Is it normal for your mom to hit you with the part of the belt that has that metal thing on the end?" Over the next 8 months, more than 60 complaints were lodged with the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services. 8 separate investigations were initiated. An investigation was underway at the time of Gabriel's death. None of them saved him. The abuse Gabriel endured defies comprehension. He was shot with BB guns. Pellets were later found embedded in his lung and groin. He was beaten with bats, golf clubs, hangers, and belt buckles. He was burned with cigarettes. He was pepper sprayed in the face. Gabriel was forced to eat cat litter, cat feces, spoiled food, and his own vomit. He was locked, bound and gagged, in a small cabinet in his mother's room. Perhaps most cruelly, Gabriel was forced to wear girls' clothing to school as punishment. His mother and Aguirre called him gay and punished him for behaviors they perceived as feminine. Prosecutors would later state that Aguirre's primary motivation was his belief that Gabriel was gay. Gabriel's siblings reported that Pearl and Aguirre often laughed while inflicting the abuse. On May 22, 2013, Gabriel was beaten and rendered unresponsive, reportedly because he had not tidied his toys. Pearl called 911, claiming Gabriel had fallen and hit his head on a dresser. Paramedics found Gabriel naked in a bedroom with a cracked skull, 3 broken ribs, BB pellets throughout his body, missing teeth, and extensive bruises and burns. One paramedic featured in the Netflix documentary stated it was the worst case she had ever encountered. Gabriel was transported to Antelope Valley Hospital and declared brain dead. On May 24, 2013, he died at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. He had turned 8 years old just 3 months earlier. Gabriel Fernandez was arrested for felony child endangerment. Isoro Aguirre was arrested for attempted murder. Both were later charged with capital murder with the special circumstance of torture. In November of 2017, a jury found Aguirre guilty of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of intentional murder by torture. The jury recommended death. On February 15, 2018, Gabriel Fernandez pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, admitting the torture special circumstance, to avoid facing the death penalty herself. At sentencing on June 7, 2018, Judge George Lamelli delivered a statement that captured the horror of the case. This case is without a doubt the most aggravated and egregious case of torture this court has ever witnessed. You want to say the conduct was animalistic, but that would be wrong because even animals know how to take care of their young. Gabriel Fernandez was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Isoro Aguirre was sentenced to death. The case also exposed catastrophic failures in the Los Angeles County child welfare system. For social workers, including Stephanie Rodriguez, who was assigned to Gabriel's case, were charged with child abuse and falsifying public records. In January of 2020, an appeals court ruled the charges should be dismissed, finding the social workers did not have custody of Gabriel for purposes of the child abuse charges. Judge Lamelli found them factually innocent. The Netflix documentary, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, released in February of 2020, brought Gabriel's story to a global audience. It led to renewed calls for child welfare reform, including caseload caps for social workers, cross-agency data sharing, and improved mandated reporter education. The Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services has since hired over 3,000 new social workers, implemented new training protocols, and reduced average caseloads. But as similar deaths continue to occur, including 10-year-old Anthony Avalos in 2018 and 4-year-old Noah Quattro in 2019, the question remains whether the reforms go far enough. Gabriel Fernandez's teacher Jennifer Garcia still thinks of him every day. Pearl, you need to know that Gabriel loved you. His cousin Emily Carranza told his mother at sentencing, and all he ever wanted was acceptance from you. The world fell in love with Gabriel as their own. Why couldn't you? Gabriel Fernandez is currently incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. In April of 2021, she filed a petition seeking resentencing, which was denied. If you have not already, please subscribe to Crime Unknown and leave a comment below. We have one final case to cover, and then we will examine the psychological factors that drive mothers to commit these unthinkable acts. Case 10. Natalie Brothwell. Our final case is among the most horrific in recent California history. On the Sunday after Thanksgiving in 2020, November 29th, Maurice Jewel Taylor Sr. and Natalie Sumiko Brothwell committed acts against their children so brutal that Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman would later call it a monstrous act of cruelty that shattered an entire family. 13-year-old Maliaka Taylor and 12-year-old Maurice Taylor Jr. were stabbed and decapitated by their parents inside the family home on Century Circle in Lancaster, approximately 70 miles northeast of Los Angeles in the Antelope Valley. But the horror did not end there. For 5 days, the bodies remained inside the home. And during those 5 days, the parents forced their 2 surviving sons, ages 8 and 9, to view their siblings' decapitated bodies. The young boys were confined to their bedrooms without food. The crimes were only discovered on December 4, 2020, when concerned clients of Maurice Taylor Sr., a personal trainer who conducted virtual sessions via Zoom, called authorities. Taylor had failed to send links for scheduled sessions and was unreachable. One client arranged for a welfare check, claiming concern about a possible gas leak. When Los Angeles County Fire Department personnel arrived at approximately 7:50 in the morning, they discovered the bodies. Sheriff's Lieutenant Brandon Dean reported, "We found 2 individuals inside, both very young, possibly in their teenage years, deceased. One appears to be a male, one appears to be a female, possibly suffering from some sort of sharp trauma, either stabbing or slicing device." Maurice Taylor Sr. was arrested that day, but Natalie Brothwell, who was present at the scene, was initially considered only a person of interest. She fled to Tucson, Arizona. For nearly 10 months, Brothwell remained at large while her husband sat in jail. Finally, on September 28, 2021, She was arrested at her residence in Tucson and extradited to California. The trial took place in November of 2025 at the Antelope Valley Courthouse in Lancaster. Prosecutors presented evidence that both parents participated in the murders and that they forced their surviving children to view the aftermath. On November 17th and 18th, 2025, a jury convicted both Maurice Taylor Sr. and Natalie Brothwell of 2 counts of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of multiple murders, as well as 2 counts of child abuse. District Attorney Nathan Hochman issued a statement. 2 innocent children were brutally murdered, and their young brothers were left to live through unimaginable horror. The jury's verdict delivers justice for these victims and sends a powerful message. Those who commit such evil acts will be held fully accountable. Sentencing is scheduled for January 13, 2026. Both parents face life without the possibility of parole, plus a consecutive sentence of 6 years and 4 months. The case stunned those who knew the family. Clients described Maurice Taylor Sr. as reliable, mellow, and kind and gentle. Attorney Howard Kern, who helped initiate the welfare check, said, "Think of the nicest person that you know, then multiply that by 5. We thought of him as a loving father, a devoted family man." But Kern also noted that Taylor appeared to be under tremendous pressure, and he observed that the relationship between Taylor and Brothwell was contentious. You could hear her yelling at him. Lancaster Mayor R. Rex Perris linked the crime to pandemic-related stress. The social fabric of the country and the world has been shredded, and we are starting to see the aftermath. What I'm seeing is more and more people feeling desperate, and that can only have one result. The surviving children were removed from the home by child welfare authorities. Their current whereabouts and status remain confidential under privacy protections. Following the conviction, Brothwell's family released a statement. This trial was about justice for Junior and Maliaka. This trial was about truth for 2 surviving children who will not be named here today, for their privacy. Neighbor Lauren Henry remembered the children fondly. Maliaka was very smart, very adventurous, and observant. She really would have grown to reach her potential. M.O. Jr. looked up to his big sister and admired all she did. I know they were together in the end. We have now examined 10 California cases spanning 4 decades. Cases involving 29 children who died at the hands of their mothers. The natural question that emerges is, how does this happen? What drives a mother to commit the ultimate betrayal? The study of maternal filicide, the killing of a child by their mother, has occupied researchers for decades. The most influential work comes from Dr. Philip Resnick of Case Western Reserve University, who in 1969 established a classification system that remains the standard today. Dr. Resnick identified 5 primary categories of maternal filicide. First, altruistic filicide, the most common type in psychiatric samples. This occurs when a mother kills her child out of love, believing death is in the child's best interest. This may accompany suicide attempts, where the mother cannot bear to leave her child motherless in a cruel world. We see elements of this in the Susan Eubanks and Socorro Caro cases. Mothers who attempted suicide after killing their children, possibly believing they were protecting them from further suffering. Second, acutely psychotic filicide, when a mother kills without any comprehensible motive, often in response to command hallucinations or delusions. The Carol Coronado case fits this pattern, with her history of hearing voices and her apparent belief that she was sending the children to be safe in heaven. Third, fatal maltreatment filicide, when death results from cumulative child abuse, though the mother did not intend for the child to die. The Gabriel Fernandez case tragically illustrates this pattern, with months of escalating torture that ultimately proved fatal. Fourth, unwanted child filicide, when a mother views her child as a hindrance, perhaps threatening a valued relationship. Fifth, spouse revenge filicide, the rarest type, accounting for only about 2% of cases. This is the Medea syndrome, named after the mythological figure who killed her children to punish her unfaithful husband. We see clear evidence of this motivation in the Sandy Nieves case, with her letters declaring, "Now you don't have to support any of us," and potentially in the Dora Louise Buenrostro case, where prosecutors argued she killed her children to hurt her ex-husband. Research has identified numerous risk factors for maternal filicide, depression and psychosis, suicidal ideation, prior mental health treatment, social isolation, history of domestic violence victimization, personal history of childhood abuse, and socioeconomic stress. Postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe mental illness affecting 1 to 2 mothers per 1,000 births, plays a significant role in some cases. Up to 4% of mothers with untreated postpartum psychosis will commit infanticide. The illness can develop suddenly, without warning, and symptoms can wax and wane, appearing normal one day and acutely psychotic the next. California, like the rest of the United States, has no specialized infanticide laws. In contrast, over 24 countries, including England, Canada, Australia, Japan, and most of Europe, have laws that recognize the role of postpartum mental illness and often result in treatment rather than incarceration. The Manhattan test used in California, dating back to 1843, asks only whether the defendant knew right from wrong at the time of the crime. It does not account for the complex ways that mental illness affects decision-making and behavior. Dr. Susan Hatters-Friedman, a leading expert in the field, has stated, when a child is murdered, the most common perpetrator is their parent. She notes that mothers and fathers kill at similar rates, but with different patterns. Mothers tend to kill younger children using more personal methods, suffocation, drowning, strangulation. Fathers tend to use more violent means and often attempt to kill the spouse as well. Perhaps most troubling is Dr. Friedman's observation that many psychiatrists do not specifically ask their patients who are mothers about thoughts of harming their children. Prevention is possible through systematic screening and direct questioning, but only if healthcare providers are trained to look for warning signs. The cases we have examined tonight share common threads: isolation, mental instability, feelings of being overwhelmed or betrayed, custody disputes, and a profound breakdown in the support systems that should protect both mothers and children. We are left with uncomfortable questions. Why do these tragedies keep happening? What more can be done to identify at-risk families before it is too late? How do we balance the rights of parents with the protection of children? There are no easy answers. But by examining these cases, by understanding the patterns and risk factors, we can hope to prevent future tragedies. Tonight, we have traveled through some of the darkest chapters in California's criminal history. We have met mothers who were supposed to protect, but instead destroyed. We have heard the stories of children whose lives were cut tragically short. Theresa Knorr, who murdered 2 daughters and had her sons help dispose of the bodies. Louise Turpin, who kept 13 children chained and starving in her Perris home. Susan Eubanks, who shot her 4 sons on a Sunday evening. Dora Buenrostro, who killed her 3 children and tried to frame her ex-husband. Socorro Caro, who shot her 3 sleeping sons in their $1 million mansion. Sandy Dawn Nieves, who staged a deadly slumber party as revenge against her ex-husbands. Carol and Coronado, whose postpartum psychosis led to the deaths of her 3 infant daughters. Patricia Ortiz, who suffocated her 3 children in a small Central Valley town. Gabriel Fernandez, whose boyfriend tortured her son Gabriel for 8 months before his death. And Natalie Brothwell, who helped decapitate her 2 children and forced surviving siblings to view the bodies. These are not stories of strangers. These are stories of families. These are stories of children who trusted their mothers and paid the ultimate price for that trust. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of harming themselves or their children, please reach out for help. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available at 988. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-422-4453. Thank you for watching Crime Unknown. If you found this documentary informative, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, stay safe.